Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Legends of Sport podcast. I'm your host, Andy Bernstein, and I'm very excited to be bringing this episode of the podcast to all of you. My guest today is former NBA player Etan Thomas. Although Etan had a stellar career as a high school basketball player, then at Syracuse, and 11 years in the NBA, I asked him to be my guest today to discuss the very important subject of athletes and activism, which has become Etan's mission and his life's work. I first became aware of Etan while in the NBA bubble in Orlando during the 3-day shutdown following the brutal and senseless shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Etan spoke eloquently and passionately on MSNBC, and I immediately purchased his book called We Matter. Luckily, Amazon did deliver in the bubble. The subject of athletes and activism has a long history, which Etan describes in his book and we discuss on the podcast. Trailblazers such as Muhammad Ali, Oscar Robertson, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf paved the way for the athlete activists of today, such as Colin Kaepernick, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Swin Cash, and so many others. We discuss how today's athletes have huge social media platforms to raise awareness about all the social issues confronting our country: police brutality, systemic racism, LGBTQ rights, etc. We also discuss how, as a father of a black son, Etan had to have the talk about how to act and respond to police, which I, as a father of a white son, never even had to consider. In his book, Etan interviewed some of the family members that were killed as the result of police brutality. His empathy and passion are moving and inspirational. I learned a lot from his writing and from our conversation on this episode. I hope you all do too. And as always, I'll see you on the backside. So welcome, Etan Thomas, to the Legends of Sport podcast. This is kind of the first time I think you and I have met in person, although I have been baseline. I did shoot you in your 11-year career. Did you get those photos that I sent to Dials for you?
I did. They worked great. I wrote an article for The Guardian, and it was about LeBron, and I wanted to get some good photos. So I appreciate you letting me use those photos for my article.
Well, I appreciate you giving me some good stuff to shoot. So, Etan, I became really aware of you when I was in the bubble, and your activism about social justice issues. It happened right after the horrific shooting of Jacob Blake, right on the heels of Breonna Taylor's murder, all the other horrific murders that we've all had to deal with and endure. There was a huge public outcry about police brutality. And, of course, the NBA shut down for 3 days in the bubble, followed by the WNBA, the other leagues. And I saw you during that period during the shutdown. We didn't know if we were going to, go home or they were going to continue playing. I saw you on MSNBC, right? And you were talking about your book.
Oh, okay. All right. You got the book.
Yeah, I got the book. So I immediately ordered the book from Amazon. Thank God Amazon delivered in the bubble.
Right.
Or else we all would have not survived.
Right.
But I reached out to our mutual friend, Krista Chin from the NBA Players Association, and she put me in touch with you. And then now here we are. Lot to cover here. I promise I won't go as deep as your Mark Cuban interview that I just listened to on your podcast.
Oh, you listened to it. We went a little deep there. We went a little deep with that interview.
It was great. Mark was awesome. But I got to tell you, I spent a lot of time in the bubble, been in the ear of my good friend Mark Spears, who I know you know, and other friends there, because I really needed to learn about what was going on, like right there where I was. Right. Okay. And with a lot of the journalists and players that I work with. So first of all, I just want to find out how your family is doing during the pandemic, your kids learning from home. What's going on with that?
Oh, we're blessed. We had already been doing a homeschool for about 5-6 years now. So we're kind of all right with the process. So we're fine. We're not even, we're not trying to go back to school. Yeah. Or, with virtual learning, everything is fine. And I work out with the kids in the basement or the backyard. Kids are athletes. My wife played ball at Syracuse, so we're blessed.
Yeah, we're blessed. Are you still coaching Malcolm's AAU team, or?
Yes, I am. We didn't play this last summer because of COVID, and I know there was a lot of AAU teams that were playing and trying to figure out and going over to the states that were open, but I just kind of shut it down. I didn't want to put the kids in any kind of risk or anything like that, but I'm still the coach.
Yeah. Well, you say in your book, in the introduction, you say that you want it to be, quote, required reading for all young athletes, right? So to get this rolling here, why is it so important to you why is it so important for the younger generation, like your son Malcolm's AAU basketball team, to understand the history and the realities of the issues of racism in our country? I know it's a huge
Right.
question, but
No,
got
that's
to
a
get
good
started.
question. And saying that I wanted, my book to be required reading wasn't because of me.
Mm-hmm.
It was more because of all of the interviews that I did, so they can get a sense. So what I wanted to do with the book was really have like had to be motivational for younger athletes
Mm-hmm.
on the history of activism. So I first interviewed all of the activists the athlete activists that I grew up admiring, that I grew up reading about. You know what I mean? That I was like, oh wow, this is so Bill Russell, Kareem, even Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf and Craig Hodges, John Carlos. I mean, I had, I told him, I was like, this is crazy that I'm interviewing you. And I had your poster on my wall since I was like in middle school. And so, learning about the sacrifices that was made before us, the history of athletes, standing up for what they believe in. And I really wanted to focus on that history. I mean, I interviewed Muhammad Ali's daughter. You know what I mean? I mean, Malcolm X's daughter.
Yeah.
And so it was amazing. But then I wanted to tie it into the athletes of present, because there's been this boom of athlete activism lately. In the past few years. It's kind of starting with Colin Kaepernick, and there's been a resurgence of athlete activism. So I interviewed Eric Reed and Torrey Smith and Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade and all of them, and I wanted to understand what motivated them to use their platform in that way. Because for a little while it was a little quiet around professional sports as far as activism, but then there was this recent boom. So I wanted to use that to be able to motivate the next generation, the younger generation, to continue on this tradition of athlete activism. So that was my main goal of the book.
Well, I think you accomplished it, because the interviews were phenomenal. I mean, every one of them was incredible, one after the next. I mean, I could point out, I wrote down like 10 of my favorites, but you just mentioned, I mean, Bill Russell, I mean, incredible, right? I mean, and I've known Craig Hodges his whole career. I didn't know that story about him in the White House and the whole thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, some of the details about
no,
what
I
happened.
didn't know that. And of course,
right.
I was working during Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf's protests and all the, I guess, backlash that he got from that, and didn't really get what was going on. I mean, I got it, but I didn't really understand how much he pushed and, gave up and sacrificed so much, and you talk about Colin Kaepernick. I mean, Rauf was Kaepernick before Kaepernick. I think you said that in your book, right?
Right. Definitely.
So I'm just trying to find out how, I mean, you talk about it in your book, but I'd love for you to talk about it here, how it all started for you, how you grew up in a household that activism was, at the forefront.
Oh yeah. Well, my mom kind of directed me. My mother was a school teacher, and so we had a whole different set of learning that we had to do outside of school. That was just that when you have a mom as a school teacher, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
And so we had to do book reports, and we had to do things of that nature. And then I would, she would give me book reports on different people. I remember she bought me the Kareem video, which was it Reflections from Inside? Something like that. Fantastic video, and then I read the autobiography, his autobiography, and then it was really, delving into how he was more than an athlete. And it was that type of education that I got when I was young. So as I got older, and I started getting into speech and debate, and I was a speech and debate kid. so in high school, we were winning state championships in basketball, but then we were also winning state championships in speech and debate. And so I started writing my own speeches, and I started, performing and doing poetry and spoken word and dramatic interpretations. I was into it, it was my thing.
Yeah.
And so I just continued. So where I really got, started with the activism part was I had a situation in high school with the police, and the police had pulled me over. And, they thought that long story short, they thought that I looked familiar to them from a mugshot. So they had, another police car showed up, 4 police cars showed up, lights flaring, on the busiest, place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on my way to an actual basketball game. and I was detained for like 45 minutes. Back in those days, I don't know if they do it as much now, but back in those days, whenever they would stop a black or brown man, they'd have you get out of the car and sit on the ground. That was just routine. You just had to sit on the ground while they do whatever they're doing. And so I was so upset by it. And then later on, they found out, they're like, oh, we recognize him because he plays for Booker T. Washington. And then they just all got in their cars and left. And I was like, so nobody gonna apologize to me? Nobody gonna, treat me like a criminal? And so I wrote a speech about that. And I used that for my original oratory. And that's when it just kind of went everywhere in Tulsa. Mm-hmm. And that's what, people started coming up to me like, thank you for saying everything that you're saying, because they'll listen to you say it, but it happens all the time, but nobody's listening to us. And that's when the light bulb came. I was like, oh, just because I played basketball, I made that connection, and I just kind of kept doing it for the rest of my career.
As you're talking about that, of course I read that in the book, and I'm remembering the other story you talked about when you're with Malcolm's AAU team and you get pulled over,
right?
And that led to the whole discussion about the talk,
right.
And it hits me right where I live, man, because I have to tell you, I have 4 kids. I had 3 in their 20s. I have a 12-year-old. Mm-hmm. My son is the oldest. I never had to have the talk with my son about what to do when the police pull you over. Right. And, this has really opened up a lot for me. I had a conversation with Steve Ballmer on my podcast. You talked to Mark Cuban on your podcast. Mm-hmm. It's not a white person's reality, right? I mean, we're all Americans. It shouldn't be this way, right? You shouldn't have to you shouldn't have to tell your son how he has to behave when he sees a police car behind him, or even like on the street, passing him by. Mm-hmm. And it's so foreign for me to know that, to have to even think about that as a parent, right?
Right.
I mean, it's traumatic. I have no other way to describe it, really.
Yeah, and it's just 2 different worlds, and I think one of the things and the reactions that I've received from the book, some of the strongest reactions is that people didn't think that pertained to athletes. Mm-hmm. So when they hear Dwayne Wade talking about it, they're like, wait, you have to go through that with your sons? Mm-hmm. And he's talking about, after Trayvon Martin happened, and, the whole hoodie thing, and how he was afraid for his sons. And he's talking about this. And, as I was going, this is before COVID, of course, but when I was going all over to different universities speaking, I remember I was at UPenn, and the audience was just about all, white males. For whatever reason, it was all white males. And, I like to have dialogue after I'm speaking and presentation. I was like, okay, so what do you think? I don't want to just sit up here and lecture you. Let's talk. Yeah. And then I was like, and it's okay if you disagree with me. I always say, that's fine. Just let's have a conversation. Yeah. And one of the students said, listen, I have to be honest with you. This isn't my reality. Like, I don't know this. Mm-hmm. Like, when I get stopped by the police, the main thing that I'm thinking about is, how do I get out of this ticket? Mm-hmm. And so the few Black people that were there all started laughing. And then they was all looking around like, why y'all laughing? They were like, because, as I said, they're laughing because that's so far removed from what we're thinking. We're thinking, how do we get out of this situation alive and get home safely? We're not thinking about, how do we get out of this ticket? That doesn't cross our mind at all. And those are just the 2 different realities. And but that's where empathy comes in, for someone to say, okay, even though this isn't my reality, I can still say that it's wrong, that it's their reality. You know what I mean? And that's where allies, are formed. And that's the importance of allies.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about our mutual friend. I know you know Karan Butler. I think you played with Karan Butler, right? Didn't you, in Washington?
Yeah, with the Wizards.
And he talked about how he got pulled over. He went back to Racine, Wisconsin, after he was in the league, to do like Karan Butler Day, in the community. He got pulled over by the police. He was riding a bicycle, I mean, and Chris Webber's story. I mean, it's just incredible to me, So,
it is.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the discussion that you kind of started there about activism in the 60s and 70s. You mentioned Kareem and Tommy Smith and who else? Bill Russell, of course. And in your book, you quote Michael Eric Dyson as saying the transition from the 60s and 70s to now is one of social conscience the social service, right? And I kind of get that, but I want you to verbalize it a little bit. But I work obviously for the NBA. I work for the teams. I'm out in the community all the time with players, and they call that community service. NBA Cares was created, for that. But it's not particularly social conscience, according to Dyson and to you, I guess.
Well, I think we was having a good debate in the book. I have a lot of respect for Dr. Dyson, and we actually had a debate with me, him, and Bill Roden at Howard University last year, and it was a great debate. I told you I did speech debate when I was high school, so I love debate. I think there's nothing wrong with good, healthy, exchange of ideas,
of course,
and opinions. But in the book with Dr. Dyson, we were having a little debate because sometimes I think that there's this nostalgia put on the 60s as if all athletes were activists. You know what I mean? And all athletes are. I'm like, well, no, it wasn't everybody. You had your examples that you can pick the same way you have your examples that you can pick now. So a lot of times I would get invited, because I was outspoken and stuff during my whole career. So I would get invited to these different panels. This is before the recent boom of athlete activism started happening in the recent years. So say, before that. And the topic would always be, why aren't the current athletes like the athletes in the 60s, as far as activism? And they wanted me to come on and kind of, bash the current athletes. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, because, there are a lot of athletes right now that, I would talk about the political discussions and debates that we had in the locker rooms. In every locker room I was in, and people were so surprised. And I was like, oh, listen, what, I'll start just naming guys, Gilbert Arenas, Carl Butler, we all have they were like, wait, Gilbert Arenas has debates about politics? I was like, yeah, see, y'all don't know. You know what I mean? Y'all don't know, but and that's it. And there is, but now recently, and I think some of the new wave has come with the top person being so vocal and willing to speak out because when you have the top person, then everybody else is inspired and influenced by that top person, being LeBron James.
Yeah.
And so the way that he has been using his platform and using his voice, I interviewed John Wall in the book, and he talked about being inspired by seeing, do you remember during the ESPYs when LeBron and D Wade and Carmelo and Chris Paul, and they all, right before the ESPYs, they talked about Black Lives Matter.
I was there. I photographed.
Right.
I photographed.
So, you photographed, right?
Yeah.
So John Wall is talking about being a younger player, watching them do that and being inspired himself. You know what I mean? And that's the beauty of it, because, athletes are even inspired by their peers. So I think that's where, we look at the positives of the growth of current athletes using their voices. But, sometimes, some people want to kind of focus on the comparing. And I don't like comparing.
Right.
You need to compare two different eras.
Of course. But the biggest comparison, obviously, is platform. They, the 60s and 70s, 80s, athletes didn't have social media platforms. They had to get their word out through the media.
Right.
Which a lot of times didn't get it right, which is kind of like your mission of your podcast, the Rematch. I love that. Sometimes the media just doesn't get it right. And LeBron James with his 60 million or whatever, 100 million, I don't know how many followers he has, but carries a lot of weight. Do you feel that there could be a negative side to that, a negative side to having a platform so big that maybe the right message doesn't get out?
Oh, of course. Now you have a responsibility. And that's the thing where, when you have a platform like that, and that means when you say something, people are going to hear it. So you have to be even more careful with what you're actually saying. So I didn't play with the social media era. Like I didn't have that. If a fan wanted to say something to me, they had to mail it to the arena. Mail an actual letter. That's just a whole different thing. But now anybody can follow you, anyone, and that's a whole different level of power, really. But with power comes, not to sound cliche, it's like Spider-Man, but comes great responsibility. That's the honest truth.
Yeah, and when somebody says "shut up and dribble," the reaction to that can be incredibly powerful, which it was. I mean, LeBron, more than an athlete, all of that reaction to what she said, "shut up and dribble." I mean, what a stupid thing to say, right? And with
but it's not something that's new.
Yeah,
it's not something that new, because like Kareem told me about how he was told to shut up and dribble.
Yeah.
Bill Russell said like everything was great when he was winning all the championships, but then when he started talking about racism and segregation, he was told to shut up and dribble. So it's not a new concept, but it's a concept that happens a lot, especially when people disagree with you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you brought up about, Shaq and Barkley. I mean, two friends of mine, and what they said about Breonna Taylor. And I mean, should have been a little bit more well thought out, I think. They opened up the can of worms there that maybe they didn't intend to open up, giving them the benefit of the doubt. Right. Yeah.
Oh, well, definitely. I mean, and that's why I wanted to, respond. I'm writing for basketballnews.com now. And actually I'm a senior writer for them. I just got that new title. I'm a senior writer for basketballnews.com. And so I was able to, to respond to them and in a way where it's not personal. I'm just breaking down where I disagree with what they said and presented different evidence contrary to their opinions that they expressed on TNT. And that's the part, though, when you have a platform, you have to either be all the way knowledgeable about it to present it correctly and accurately, or don't touch it. You know what I mean? Because when you're dealing with a topic as sensitive as somebody who lost their lives to, police violence, you can't just gloss over it or just, know a little bit of, facts and that you kind of picked up and then give a whole opinion about it. You have to really do your research. And that's where that, with a platform like that becomes great, great responsibility. And you have to be responsible with your words.
Yeah, I read that article that you wrote in basketballnews.com, and you're absolutely right. I mean, 100%. So Etan, one of the things that struck me, incredibly was your interviews with the families of the victims of police brutality. I mean, first of all, how was that for you? It had to be incredibly emotional. I mean, to try to interview them and have, obviously it's just, you empathize with them, but it was, what kind of experience was that for you? I can't even imagine doing those interviews.
Those were the toughest interviews that I've ever had to do in my life, to be honest with you. Those were tough. I mean, honestly, I was fighting back tears myself, interviewing them, and I'm interviewing them in person, and I'm sitting there looking at them, like Javaris Fulton, who was Trayvon Martin's brother. And I'm interviewing him, and I'm seeing like the lump in the back of his throat as he's talking about losing his brother, and he's getting choked up, and I see the emotions in his face, and I was interviewing Emerald Gardner and Tiffany Crutcher, and she's talking about losing her brother to police violence. But then there's certain things that they say, like Emerald said, imagine, she was talking about what there's certain things that they say that just hits you hard. So Emerald was talking about what it means to her, what it meant to her to see Kobe Bryant in the entire Lakers, or LeBron James or Derrick Rose wearing the I Can't Breathe shirts. And so she's saying, imagine every time you turn on the TV, what you normally see is somebody justifying why your father deserved to die. And then you see an athlete showing support for your father. It just brings you to tears. And I was just like, wow, like you don't think of it like that, because sometimes people say, oh, what does wearing a t-shirt mean? That's not, but you hear from them. So since I interviewed them in the book, I've been working with them continuously with their foundations, with their initiatives, with what they're trying to push for, and their respective cities. And all of it boils down to pushing for laws to change of police accountability. It's not anti-police. And that's the thing that's crazy. They're not anti-police. You know, I understand how they could be, but they're not.
Yeah.
And they want the system to be able to be changed, and where more cases like theirs don't happen in the future.
Right.
And I just have so much respect for that.
Yeah.
Though. So I've just been working with them a lot. And, you know, it's tough. It's emotionally draining. It's hard. It's, you know, frustrating, everything. But, you know, I'm going to keep on doing that.
Yeah, it's incredible to think that these tragedies happen and they never should have happened in the first place. And all of a sudden there's cameras and microphones shoved in these family members' faces. And I think everybody forgets these people are grieving. They just lost a family member. And then you talk about once the cameras are gone, then what happens? You know, you have children, you have spouses, you have, I mean, so the fact that you're helping carry on the message and bring the message forward, you know, children of the movement, that, you know, is very impressive to me. That's great that foundations are being established to help raise awareness. So like you said, it doesn't happen again. We know it's going to happen again, but maybe it won't happen again as frequently, and maybe the system will change somehow, right? I think it starts at the top. I think we got to get different leadership.
No, it does.
Yeah. You know, I wanted to tell you that you talked about when you interviewed Carmelo Anthony in the book that that he talked about his leadership together, the conversation with our sons and daughters, the initiative that he put together in LA. I was the only photographer allowed to photograph that. And yeah, and it was, I don't even know the right word, but, you know, I was trying to do my job and stay discreet. And they told me, look, you know, don't distract and all that stuff. But I was listening to the conversations, and it was incredibly powerful. I mean, you had people from the police departments talking to youth from the community, and really trying to understand each other's fears. Really, I mean, it's really about fear, you know. And the police really talked about how they were in fear, you know, in those neighborhoods, which you don't really hear police talking about that very often. I wish that that these conversations were more often. I think that was an incredibly vitally important afternoon that I spent. Have you discussed with Carmelo or anybody about continuing those initiatives in the communities?
Yeah, no, I actually have, you know, and talked with people. I know they just formed the NBA Social Change Fund. And I think that right now, where a lot of the focus is police accountability, and changing the laws to be a little bit more. I mean, right now, it seems as though, and each department is different. Each police department is completely different, and a lot of the times, it's so difficult to prosecute a policeman if they are in fact guilty of doing something incorrectly. That police accountability is just not there. So that's kind of been the shifted focus a little bit towards the actual laws, and that's how you get things changed. I mean, I just watched the commercial with Michael Jordan, and you know what I mean, all the different people that are coming on, Chris Paul, and they're all talking about changing the laws and changing that's when I'm working with the family members of victims of police brutality. They're all focused on changing the laws as well. That's I mean, it's tough because you want to be able to, and there's ways that you can do both, but unfortunately, you can't change everybody. But you can make it illegal for them to act on I always quote Tiffany Crutcher in this, because this is what she always says. She says, you can't legislate somebody's heart. She's like, you can't do that. She's like, but what you can do is make it illegal for them to act on their biases or racism or, you know, prejudices. And I agree with that, you know. So that's kind of been the direction that they're fighting for, is the change in actual laws.
So where I am in the LA area, there's a Black Lives Matter protest daily on the major street corner here in my area. And a few times my 12-year-old daughter and I, you know, we went out and we joined them, and it was
Mm-hmm.
very empowering. It was wonderful for her and for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, I saw somebody holding a sign that said, "Same shit, different decade."
Yeah, I know.
You
Isn't that
know,
terrible?
yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It really. I mean, of all the signs that everyone had, that one just struck me because shit has not changed really.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so what do we got to do?
I mean, we got to keep pushing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I was listening to I still call him President Obama. I mean, I guess you can't really
Yeah.
want to call him Barack Obama now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
I was listening to his speech
Mm-hmm.
from a few days ago in Philadelphia, and
Mm-hmm.
he's talking about what our ancestors had to go through, what they
Mm-hmm.
had to fight,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't give up,
Mm-hmm.
and their distance to the finish line looked a lot further than our distance, but they didn't give up. So it's a situation where it's easy to get frustrated, because especially when you have a case after case after case that happens, and it's like you can't give up. You know what I mean? And a lot of times I'm so amazed at how a lot of the family members, and I keep directing it back to them, because that's really where the focus really is. And I'm gonna do Emerald Gardner's book with her next book with her, where she's gonna tell her whole story and how. And I've seen like literally. So her first public speaking anything was at the NBA All-Star Weekend in New York, long time ago, and it was shortly after it happened. I had a Black Lives Matter event in Harlem. Connected with Canaan Baptist Church and the school board, and brought, it was like 2,500 Black and brown young men to the church. And, it was amazing. Isaiah Thomas spoke, Alonzo Mourning, Chris Broussard, amazing panel. And I wanted to invite Emerald there just so she can feel the love from the community. You know what I mean? The support from the community. And she didn't want to say a word. She was just like, I don't know if I want to talk. I was like, no, you don't have to talk. I just want you to feel it. And to see her now from then, she's just blossomed into this young activist. And it's amazing. She's pushing. She was meeting with senators. She was getting the Eric Garner law passed. She was, pushing for the Daniel Pantaleo to be fired. All these different things. So when you see their perseverance in situations like this, and they're not giving up, it's like, we can't give up, because we have them who are, still fighting for justice, and the fact they don't want that to happen to anybody else. So but it's a draining process. I got to be honest with you. It's tough, because you hit so many bumps in the roads, but then there's also a lot of encouragement when you see, like, I'll say this, and I said this a lot of times on these different programs, or MSNBC, CNN, or whatever. After George Floyd's murder, this was probably the most that I personally have ever seen of white people protesting, across the country after a Black man was killed by the police. Literally, like, I'm looking at some protests in some states and some cities, and it's all white people. Ain't no Black people at the protests. You know what I mean? It's just, and it's that is something where we can look at as a positive, because it's like the country is realizing and seeing, something needs to change. Like, this isn't right. It's since then you've had a movement of a lot of people trying to get things right, try to correct the wrongs. They realize things are, and I talk about all of America. And that's something that you can look at as a positive. Of course, progress is not going to happen in the time frame that it should have happened, because it should happen a long time ago. You know what I mean? We're already behind the clock on when it should have happened. But you can look at that as a positive.
Well, the fact that it was videotaped, on somebody's phone, and that the world saw how absolutely horrifying that murder was, which of course you didn't have in the 60s and 70s. Things were recorded, of course. But I just think as Americans, white, Black didn't matter. I mean, this cannot happen in our country. And then that opening up, well, it has happened. It's happened over and over and over and over. Why has it happened? And this systemic racism issue just completely got out into the open. But unfortunately, we got a guy in the White House who feeds into that, right?
Right.
And the divisiveness, and that's a whole other conversation. But hopefully,
Yeah, it is.
hopefully the country can heal from that.
Right.
Are you optimistic that if we have a change in leadership, that the country can heal and
I
move
am
forward?
optimistic. I mean, it's interesting when you look at the entire rap sheet of Trump. It's like this shouldn't even be close.
Yeah.
I mean, when you just go down the list of being an international embarrassment, you look at COVID, you look at, you just go down the entire list. It should be a landslide victory for Biden. It's like it shouldn't even be close. And I wonder how people see all of this and still support him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I've given up on Trump. I mean, Trump is he is who he is.
Yeah.
But then I start thinking, but there are a lot of people who see all of this and still support him. So what does that say? And that's where you're like, oh goodness, well, how many of these people are there? You know what I mean? Just walking around that look at Trump and say, you know what, that guy Trump, I can support exactly what he's saying. Like, I don't understand how that happens, but
yeah, I don't either. There's things in life I don't think we can ever explain.
Right.
Well, we can go on and on here, my friend, and I'd love to go on and on with you. I want to talk at some point in another venue or podcast. We can talk about fatherhood, because I love what I'm gonna get your book, by the way, but I love what you and D Wade and everybody have been talking about. I watched the video from the Houston All-Star game.
Okay.
And, unfortunately, I was there. I go to all the All-Star games, but they never assign me to like the really cool stuff. Like your Black Lives Matter panel. I would have loved to have gone to that in Harlem, but they got me doing something else. So, but I would love to talk to you about that, because fatherhood, it's near and dear to my heart.
Definitely. Yeah. And it was great. I was part of President Obama's Fatherhood Initiative. So was Dwayne Wade, and so we were doing a lot of things together. And then after that, part of his My Brother's Keeper with dealing with younger men. Yeah. I mean, it was and it's crazy because after the transition, all those programs are just they went away. So hopefully, in the next few days, we have a change of office, and we could. But it's amazing to me where so much of the progress that we made in 8 years with Obama was purposely attempted to be undone in 4 years of Trump.
Yeah. But we're resilient. Americans are resilient. Humans are resilient. Kids are resilient, and maybe it'll just be a blip on the American history radar at some point.
Hopefully. Generations down the road will be reading about it. Like, this really happened?
Yeah.
4 years with Trump? All this happened in this 1 4 year period?
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe the good thing is that, we're all talking about it now, and it's not kind of, I don't want to say in the shadows, but it's out there, and we're all, it's everybody's consciousness and awareness. And, here, my group, Legends of Sport, we're going to continue to get the word out and be allies as best we can and discuss these topics, because, it's not just about sports. It's about everything else. And
that's true. Before, can I ask you a question before we go?
Of course.
All right, so you were in the bubble.
Yeah.
And so you saw the COVID protocol and everything. And I was someone who I was very vocally against the NBA restarting, and I actually wrote an open letter to Adam Silver, kind of pleading with him, like, it's not worth the risk. And I'm pretty much against all sports starting just because of COVID reasons, especially youth sports. Yeah. I don't think youth sports should even think about starting. That's a whole different issue. But what do you think can be duplicated from what you saw in the bubble? Can they bring the bubble format to college, or to because it did work? So even though I was vehemently against it starting, Adam Silver proved me wrong. He had it worked. He had a great system. And you didn't have outbreaks like other sports had, like baseball had, or like football's having. It worked, and he kept the players safe. And that's definitely a credit to Adam Silver being a great commissioner. But can that be duplicated in other places? Because that's the only way that I see now that any other sport should even think about opening is duplicating what Adam Silver did.
Well, the only way you can duplicate it is to have a hermetically sealed bubble, which they did at the Wide World of Sports complex. I mean, it was literally sealed. I mean, you couldn't get in, get out. I mean, I went down there, I arrived at the Orlando airport. Somebody picked me up, took me to a hotel, and I never saw, I never saw like the other side of the fence for 7 weeks.
I got you.
I had a quarantine for 7 days in my room. They're testing you constantly. The priority was the health of the athletes, staff, team personnel. There was a little bit of there was a lot of concern about the Disney employees, but they tested them constantly. They had a few that did test positive, but as soon as they did, they got them out of there.
Right.
So I can't imagine it working. I mean, you say college. I can't even imagine doing anything in college that is a bubble atmosphere. I mean, kids go back to college the next night, they're partying in frats, and this COVID breakout, then they're closing the schools down. They should have thought of that going in. I'm watching football games. I can't even perceive of playing football, I mean, even in a bubble, but I can't. How are you going to do a bubble in football? Baseball is trying the best they can, and I think it went well in Arlington, but I think we're going to have to wait. And the NBA and NHL, the indoor sports, I think are going to have to wait until they can put some bodies in arenas, to make it viable as a business. Can't do the bubble again.
Can't do it again.
I think it was too expensive personally. I think it was, you talk about the sacrifice that the players had to make. I mean, LeBron said straight out, it was the most challenging thing he had to do in his whole career. 3.5 months or so away from his family. And, yes, we've heard all the comments, have you ever been deployed to Iraq and all that stuff? But, these are athletes. They're not used to being sequestered for that amount of time. I mean, think about if it was you in your time when you played. I mean, it would have been
that'd be tough.
Yeah,
especially being away from family.
Exactly.
Especially when you have little kids. Your little kids, they don't want you to leave any time.
Yeah.
Even to go to the grocery store, they don't want you to leave. So it's
it was psychologically challenging. It really was, to know that you're in a place like you can't leave this place. It's not like going to summer camp or your freshman year in college, and you
can't leave.
You cannot leave.
Right.
And there are like barricades, and there's people like making sure you don't leave.
So the options I saw where Adam Silver wants to be able to start in December. Like you want to be able to do something, but how does that realistically happen? I mean, especially if the numbers keep increasing the way they're increasing now.
Yeah. I know, especially in states that the numbers have gone through the roof. I mean,
Florida, I don't even. That's a whole different. That's like the worst in the world. But but I did see that the NHL went to Canada.
Yeah,
they were successful.
Yeah, they were in 2 cities. They were in Toronto and Edmonton, I think, and they were successful. But it was a similar model to what the NBA did. It's all enclosed bubble situation. So
I don't know what else could work. I don't know anything else that could work though.
Yeah, well, more will be revealed. We'll have to see what Adam and the Board of Governors have in mind. I wish the best for the league, of course. We want to see everybody be successful, but we also want to see everybody healthy and safe.
Definitely.
Yeah, I have one more subject I want to ask you about. I know you played during the era that Kobe played, and I don't know if you had a personal relationship with Kobe. He and I were great friends. We did our book together, and I like to ask every guest that I have on the podcast if you have a personal memory, a story, something definitely about his legacy that has stayed with you.
Definitely. Well, first off, I was in the same high school class as Kobe, class of '96. I went to Syracuse. He went to the NBA. So we had different paths. But so with my Kobe story is during my time with the Wizards, I had open heart surgery and I had to miss a season. And Kobe came up to me one time when I was coming back. I wasn't playing. I was just not in the hospital coming to the games. And he came, I remember he walked into the Verizon Center, and he's going by and he looks at me and sees me. Then he turns around, comes right to me, and he says, "Hey, you know, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's your health?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm good. I'm good." He's like, "You sure?" He was like, "Cause you know, I've been praying for you, you know, so just really, you know, take care of yourself and everything like that." You know, I was like, "Oh, that's what's up." And he gave me a hug, right? And then he left. And it was like, you know, because Kobe wasn't, I mean, Kobe, he was kind of, you know, not standoffish. He would give you the regular, "How you doing? Keep it going." You know what I mean? But, so Kobe gave me a hug. I was like, "Whoa, that was different." I remember I told my homeboy, who was the hugest Lakers fan, Z, since we were like little. He's been a Lakers fan, and I told him, and he was just so excited. You know, he was like, "Yeah, see, Kobe's a great guy," and I was like, "Yeah, I can't say anything bad about him." So that's my personal story about Kobe Bryant.
That's a great story. Yeah, I mean, I got to see so many moments like that behind the scenes.
Right.
It never got publicized.
Yeah, people don't know about.
Yeah, and you know, he had his Mamba personality that he had to turn that on, even around opponents. You know, that just to keep you on edge a little bit. But that was his way.
Yeah.
Well, listen, man, thanks so much for this conversation. Is there anything that you want to promote here? I mean, I know basketballnews.com, your podcast, the Rematch, you know.
Yep. So that's what I'm doing. I'm writing a lot for basketballnews.com.
And
my podcast, the Rematch. I just finished an interview with Kenneth Blakeney from the head coach of Howard University. So that'll be coming out this week. You know, excited about what I'm doing with the Rematch and with them.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm just gonna keep on doing it. I like having the opportunity to I guess join the media and be able to give people a chance to tell their story, promote themselves, do what they're, you know. So I'm one of you now. So
yeah. Well, I wasn't one of me until I started. I mean, I'm a photographer by trade. I just finished my 39th season, you know. But when I launched this platform, it was because I wanted to bring awareness to athletes who sort of the spotlight has moved away from them. Maybe some of them need, you know, a little help, you know, help with marketing or whatever it happened to be. But as we got deeper and deeper into it, and I started to interview people and learn their stories, it's just so fascinating, everybody's story, right? It's just incredible. And your foundation too. I don't want to leave out your foundation.
Right. So my Etan Thomas Foundation, with the Players Philanthropy Fund, I do a lot of great stuff with them. And I'm really, you know, focused on young people, on youth. That's really where my passion is. And so it's you know, it's when you're blessed to be able to be an athlete, you have power and influence, and you can influence someone positively or negatively, but you're going to influence them one way or the other because they're going to watch you.
Yeah.
And so it's just using that power for good. Something that I was kind of, you know, going back to your original question about my upbringing. That's what my mom did for me. You know, I used to have to come and speak to her classes when I was like high school. You know, and I was like, "Mom, what am I going to tell your class?" And she got me into that. And whenever I would come back from Syracuse and visit, I'd have to come and speak at her class. You know, and so that was just something that I always did. So, and I realized the power of it. And I remember when athletes came and spoke to me when I was in like middle school. I remember Wayman Tisdale coming to me, and you know, Lee Mayberry and John Starks. All these guys are from Tulsa. So when you see them, you're listening to literally everything they say because they're athletes. And that's just the reality of it. So it's just using that power for good.
Well, you're doing a lot of good out there, and count me as one of your followers and your fans and mouthpiece and whatever we can do on our platform to help. Please don't hesitate to reach out, you know, and I'm now an avid subscriber to the podcast and basketballnews.com. Try not to miss you when you're on TV, you know. And, you know, as things, well, you know, if you're doing virtual events or, you know, God willing, we'll be doing in-person events, please keep me posted because we will promote that on our social media and on the podcast. All right.
I'll definitely do that. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Etan. Great to see you, man. And
great to see you too.
Stay well and think good thoughts for the next few weeks, right?
Definitely. For the next few days. It's coming down now.
That's right. All right, man.
All right, you too. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks so much, man.
All right, bless.
Bye. Well, thank you to Etan Thomas for joining us on this episode. This was a really special and important conversation, and I hope all of you learned as much as I did from this episode. Our mission at Legends of Sport is to continue to raise awareness about the issues confronting all of us. I admire Etan's passion, and we will follow and support him closely. Please follow Etan at basketballnews.com, as well as Etan Thomas 36 on Instagram and Twitter, and his website and foundation can be found at etanthomas.com. Reminder that you can find us on the LA Times app and online, as well as Apple and Spotify and your favorite podcast platform. Keep following us on Instagram at Legends of Sport, Twitter at Legends_of_Sport. Our blog is legendsofsport.blog, and our TikTok and YouTube channels are Legends of Sport. My photography can be found on Instagram and Twitter at ADB Photo Inc. Thanks again to my producer and researcher, Veronica Ahn, and to you, all our loyal followers. Until we see you again in 2 weeks, stay well, stay safe, and, of course, wear your mask. See you guys.